They emerge from the caustic fog. Chlorine and bromine cling to their lungs, like something dragged out of a nightmare. They lurch forward, groaning, uniforms half melted and hanging in strips, faces slick with blood. Each step looks like it might be their last, but they keep coming. The German forces, heavily armed and equipped with protective gear, gasp in horror. Nothing could have survived the bombardment they unleashed. And yet, something has. Their skin is burnt and mottled. Their tongues are blistered and blackened in their mouths. All that emerges from their burbling throats are terrifying, wet screams. Every time one of them coughs and splutters in their mad charge towards the numerically superior German forces, they hack up a necrotic wad of lung meat. The Germans begin to panic. It's like a terror conjured from their deepest imaginations. They break ranks, some discard their weapons and run for their god-forsaken lives, away from the cloud, away from these revenant monsters. Future historians will call this horrifying incident Attack of the Dead Men. The poison gas bombardment from the German forces on the Russian Osowiec Fortress in northeastern Poland had already effectively killed these men. Their organs melted from the inside, their weapons rendered useless. But the iron will of a soldier is often the last thing to corrode. The Germans will regroup and try to crush the defenses of this fortress, but the world will forever remember when a handful of walking corpses terrified one of the strongest armies in the world. And this wasn't even the most brutal battle in history. The Battle of Cannae. 216 BC. It's not a fight, any more than it can be said that the pig fights the butcher. Roman infantry are packed so tightly that there's no room to swing a sword, no space even to move your arms. Shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, the line collapses into a single crushing mass of men. You can't see beyond the few faces pressed in around you, but you feel it, the slow, relentless push, as the formation compresses deeper into the chaos. The pressure grows on your armor and your bones, pushing the air out of your lungs. And worse still, you can hear something in the distance. Screaming, the hacking of flesh. It's impossible. You vastly outnumbered the enemy. 80,000 Roman soldiers, the largest force that the Republic has ever assembled. How did the tables turn so violently? Of course, it would be the work of one of Rome's greatest enemies, Hannibal of Carthage. When Rome's generals heard that Hannibal had taken the Roman grain magazine of Cannae, it seemed like the greatest chance to crush this upstart. They could quell the threat of the Carthaginians for good. Little did they know, this is exactly what Hannibal is hoping for. Even with his inferior 50,000 troops, it seems as though fate is on his side. A brutal Libeccio wind tears across the field, kicking up a choking dust storm that rolls across the battlefield. Hannibal has planned for this. He positions his army to the north, forcing the Romans to face south, straight into the wind. The Romans are focused on their numerical superiority, so they don't notice that Hannibal has already manipulated the terrain to his advantage. He's penned the Roman forces into a narrow valley, bordered by a river that makes easy escape impossible. As the Roman forces advance, Hannibal exploits the flexibility of his troops, shaping his line into a broad crescent. He flanks the Roman forces on the left and right, but still, the Romans don't spot what's happening. They keep pushing forward, perhaps hoping to break Hannibal's ranks with the sheer number of troops at their disposal. Nobody will notice until it's too late that the 2 points on the ends of Hannibal's crescent formation are beginning to converge around the Roman forces, turning it into a circle. All 80,000 Roman troops are trapped inside. The army's greatest advantage, their size, has become their greatest weakness. As Hannibal's soldiers push in, the soldiers pile on top of each other, crushing, suffocating, leaving no way to escape. And then, the real slaughter begins. Hannibal's forces wield their falcata, brutal curved swords, perfect for a weighted downward hacking motion, and they put their falcata to work. While the Roman forces scream and struggle underneath their own weight, Hannibal's men slash and carve. Necks are ripped open, limbs cut off. The razor edges of swords rip armor and skin and flesh and bone. The whipping winds soon reek of the blood falling to the ground in great warm gouts as the outer ranks of Romans are reduced to butchered stacks of meat. In the hours that follow, more Romans fall than at any other point in the Republic's proud history. 20% of Roman fighting men between the ages of 18 and 50 died at Cannae, wiped out under the unforgiving blades of Hannibal's men. Hannibal lost only 6,000 men. Of the Roman troops, only 14,000 were able to escape the unthinkable slaughter. Another 10,000 were captured and held prisoner. The rest lay in pieces at Cannae, barely recognizable as anything once resembling humans. It was an incident that shook the Roman Republic to its very core. If Hannibal had used this momentum to mount an immediate attack on the capital, he may just have achieved his dreams of wiping Rome as we know it off the map. It was only his inaction and the decision of the Republic to engage more cautiously with the Carthaginian in future that prevented them from facing total ruin. But even if this wasn't the decisive point that gave Hannibal the eternal winning streak, it let him put his bloody mark on history. He was the architect of one of the greatest acts of battlefield butchery ever witnessed by human eyes. The battles of the ancient world were horrific and visceral, but the invention of modern weapons took the brutal lethality of warfare to a whole new level. The Battle of Verdun. February 21st, 1916. For 10 hours straight, hell rains from the sky. 808 German heavy artillery guns fire shell after shell, millions of them battering the landscape and decimating anyone unlucky enough to be caught out in the open. The non-stop rumble of long-range machine guns can be heard across the French countryside, nearly 100 miles away. At midday, the firing stops, but only long enough to lull the enemy into a false sense of security. Any French soldiers left alive after the morning's carnage are in for a nasty surprise. When they reveal their positions, they're quickly dispatched by German shock troops waiting along the banks of the nearby river. Their orders are simple: bleed France white. The worst part, after all the blood spilled, this is still only the first day of the longest and most brutal engagement of the First World War, the Battle of Verdun. The German army, though, have a different name for their offensive: Operation Judgment. Verdun is a town on the River Meuse and site of an imposing fortress called Fort Douaumont, which was part of a massive defensive ring of concrete forts. The fortified city has kept France safe from invaders for hundreds of years. That's precisely why the Germans have chosen it as their target. The logic being that the French could never bring themselves to surrender the city and will defend it down to the last man. Taking the territory itself is incidental. The true purpose is to waste French resources, drag the conflict out as long as possible, and slaughter as many enemy men as they can. That mission will prove to be terrifyingly easy. Verdun is located near a German railroad. Meanwhile, French supply lines and communications are weak. The fort's location on the river provides German troops with not one, but 3 angles from which to attack. Renovations to the fort were completed in the 1880s, adding steel and concrete reinforcements to the fort walls to make it more resistant to artillery. But that was still 30 years ago. It's a terrifying new century, where new technology makes mass death possible on a scale that was never before thought possible. In gaps between artillery shelling, observation aircraft circle overhead, hunting for survivors. Infantry troops attack with not just rifles and hand grenades, but also with something new: flamethrowers. Over the last 2 years, combatants on all sides have gotten used to the pace of this war. Agonizingly slow, fought by attrition just as much as with weapons. But Verdun is different. Through the force of their ruthlessly efficient onslaught, the Germans have already advanced 3 miles and captured the nearby forest of Bois des Cours. 2 French battalions managed to hold them for 2 days, but dwindling supplies forced them into retreat. By February 25th, Fort Douaumont has fallen to the Germans. Desperate to defend Verdun at all costs, France's commander-in-chief Marshal Joseph Joffre puts Philippe Pétain in charge of the city's defense. Pétain wastes no time and takes personal command of the artillery units, reorganizing the heavy guns so that the more the Germans advance, the more they expose themselves to attack. But there's another problem now. By late February, spring is on its way, turning the hard earth into a swamp. Sudden snowstorms followed by warming and thawing has left the soldiers on both sides damp and freezing. But the thick mud has the benefit of stopping German advancement for a few days, giving France a chance to re-establish supply lines. As many as 12,000 supply trucks are brought in from nearby Bar-le-Duc down a road that will gain the local nickname of the Sacred Way after the war. These trucks are in constant rotation and are under constant threat from German artillery. If a truck is shot at, it's immediately abandoned. There's no time to stop for repairs with the enemy bearing down on you. But the chain runs like a Swiss watch. It's estimated that one arrives on the battlefield every 14 seconds at the height of the conflict. Under Pétain's leadership, the French army is able to hold their own and keep the Germans out of the Verdun, though they still manage to steadily creep forward, claiming sections of the forest. Even though the French have yet to fully shake themselves off after the brutal first day of bombardment, with new troops and supplies, they start to launch their own limited offensives. The Germans are forced to extend their lines in an attempt to take out the French artillery completely. March and April become a gory back and forth of artillery bombardment, turning the thick woods into muddy wastelands strewn with corpses and spent shells. Despite the deaths, no major gains are made. One village, Vaux, is captured and recaptured 16 times throughout the conflict. Germany continues to grind France down, but progress is now punishingly slow. France continues to hold a key position, a hill aptly named Le Mort Homme, the Dead Man. And as the battle wears on, another threat makes itself known to both sides: the elements. Spring rain fills the trenches with mud and water, infested with rats and the filth of hundreds of men living and dying in close proximity. Even those who manage to survive artillery, grenades, and flamethrowers succumb to infection. Trench foot is endemic. The horrific condition causes the feet to painfully swell, and is a result of standing in ankle-deep water for long periods of time. Weather starts to improve by May, and the pace of battle starts to pick up again. The Germans take Le Mort Homme, then the French surrender Fort Vaux. In June, the Germans advance on two more key forts, Souvy and Tavannes. These gains are made with the help of another horrifying new weapon. On the night of June 22nd, 116,000 shells marked with green crosses are fired at the French artillery positions. When the shells make contact, they don't explode. Instead, they fill the air with a compound called diphosgene, so toxic it could even destroy the filters of the French soldiers' gas masks. Over 1,600 men are suffocated to death that night, and the next morning, Germany is able to completely overrun French defenses and get within 3 miles of the Verdun citadel. The 1st of July sees the Battle of the Somme, which means troops and equipment from both sides are rerouted across the country to take part in this new conflict. But it didn't stop the Germans from trying to take Verdun. They had a mission here: to bleed every last French soldier dry until there was nobody to defend the position, and the people of France begged their government to surrender. But in trying to do so, they only wasted more and more of their own resources and faced worse and worse casualties. By the 9th of July, not even the gas shells were effective. The French had developed new masks with filters that were specifically designed for diphosgene. The grueling back and forth continues as it did in the spring, with huge losses on both sides, but no significant territory gained. The tide starts to turn when Pétain is promoted, leaving General Robert Nivelle to take up his old position. Nivelle has a bold new strategy: creeping barrage. The artillerists fire a curtain of shells, which blast through the enemy and make room for the infantry to advance forward. With this technique, France is able to reclaim Fort Douaumont in October. Then, in November, they launch heavy bombardment on Fort Vaux that lasts an entire week. There's a lull in battle. Then in December, Nivelle launches the second defensive. The French troops reach the front line, and after 10 agonizing months, the battle finally comes to an end on December 18, 1916. An estimated 337,000 German soldiers and 377,000 French soldiers were killed in what will be remembered as one of the bloodiest battles of the Great War. But being on that nightmarish battlefield would still be preferable to what's next. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir. The Marine's hand shakes as he draws his combat knife and tries to cut through the blood-soaked, frozen fabric of his fellow soldier. He's sweating from the exertion, but it has already turned to painful ice crystals against his skin. It's below -30. Early December 1950, deep in Korea's most mountainous region. His hands are shaking. The Marine's friend is moaning like a wounded animal when he pulls the ripped cloth away, peeling it up from his skin. The 3-day-old bullet wound underneath is sickening. Black, frostbitten, but swollen and dripping with caustic gangrenous pus. He's a goner. but there's no relief. All the morphine that could have eased his passing is frozen solid in its syringes. They're outnumbered on this bitter pass, 4-1, 30,000 UN soldiers and US X-Corps Marines up against 120,000 Chinese troops, surrounding them on every side in the frigid hellhole they call Chosin Reservoir. They're what's left, retreating after a sudden influx of Chinese communist soldiers have poured into the Korean peninsula and smashed the US vanguard in a lethal surprise attack. The troops escaping here will someday be known as the Chosin Few, but the ones that actually survive these brutal 17 days will be even fewer. The whipping winds carrying sheets of snow and sleet reduces visibility to almost nothing in front of them, making evac from the air difficult. Their combat knives and the butts of their rifles will be invaluable now, as the cold is bad enough at this point to make their firearms inoperable. They're like the soldiers of yore. If they want to survive this, it'll be by virtue of their strength and fury and their will to live, even if it means ripping through an enemy with your bare hands. They're pushing southeastward, ignoring the agony of the cold and the crushing weight of their equipment. Normally, you're in the most danger as a sitting duck out in the open. Not here. Things take a truly horrifying turn when the UN forces and the ROK soldiers and civilians traveling with them are forced through the narrowest route up through the mountains towards the evacuation point. The escape route runs up through the high ground between Kotori and Chinhongni, a choke point carved into ice and rock. Chinese soldiers are closing in on all sides, and in some places, the gravel path beneath their feet is only wide enough to walk single file. They inch through 70 miles of horror on that unpaved mountain road. The ones who succumb to their wounds just have to be left. Frostbitten toes fall off inside boots and rattle. When groups of enemy troops attack, ranks break and the fighting splits into brutal one-on-one battles. Bayonets pierce skin and flesh, screams ring out, only to gurgle through blood in the throat. Tactical shovels and rocks bash open skulls. Sometimes, in the thick of fighting, brawlers stumble together and roll down to mutual death in the crags below, where they will never be recovered. Enemy fire rings overhead, the cracking reports of rifles. Occasionally, a head among the UN coalition snaps back. The sniped soldiers fall to the ground with an arc of blood and brain spraying out of their perforated skull. Their last thoughts are already freezing and half buried in snow by the time they hit the ground. No time to mourn, no time to bury. Keep moving, or join them. In the unforgiving Korean mountainside, Chinese soldiers with skin like brittle porcelain are frozen into the rock face. More of these soldiers die from the sheer ravages of the brutal cold than anything that actually happens in combat. In their superiors' haste to deploy them, they haven't been given proper winter gear. The cold punishes them even more than their American and European foes on the frostbitten slopes. Some respite from the blockade comes when Marine Corps fighter bombers from the naval backup streak ahead, raining hellfire down upon the entrenched Chinese forces. Screams and explosions, that metallic stink of blood and burned flesh and smoke rising up in great pillars towards the sky. No medieval painter etching out their vision of hell could imagine anything as horrible. Fire and ice as one. Scattered body parts, the moans of the dying barely competing with the snarl of the endless wind. You'd cry if your tears weren't already frozen to your cracked, blood-stained cheeks. The men fight bravely, but nature doesn't make exceptions for valor. Over the course of the brutal retreat, the 1st Marine Division loses almost 4,400 men to combat and 7,300 to the cold. Both sides are starving thanks to inadequate food supplies and often an inability to carry what little food they actually have. Muscles pump acid as the march goes on. You cannot sleep. You cannot rest. If you stop, you'll freeze like all the others. Artillery support from divisions on the other side of the blockade makes advancing easier, though the endless sounds of explosions and screams ringing in the ears of the fighters feels like a wound to the soul. And for every enemy soldier that they stab or blow up or gun down, it seems like legions more simply pour in to take their place. Such a reversal in the fortunes of the US in the Korean War seemed almost unimaginable mere weeks earlier. After fleeing across the frozen ice to the inner perimeter, a volunteer rescue party went right back into the thick of it to save 84 of the wounded who'd been left behind. Eventually, the surviving Chosin Few managed to escape the horrors of the pass and the blockade. If this hadn't been done, Dozens more surely would have been added to the death toll. But for as unimaginably brutal as the horrors of the Chosin Reservoir battle were, it still seems like gentlemanly warfare compared to the abject nightmare to come. The Battle of Stalingrad. For the citizens of Stalingrad, the last few months have been nothing short of hell on earth. In what used to be the streets of their city, ripped apart by tank tracks and Luftwaffe explosives, they duck around the relentless fire of snipers that have smashed skulls and spilled brains onto the nearby concrete. It's been minus 40 degrees these last few days, but they can barely feel the pain of their frozen skin or numb limbs. While squads of soldiers rip each other to shreds in the streets, they duck around corners, hiding in shadows. They form foraging parties to find anything that might resemble food. Digging through the frozen earth for worms, boiling and eating old leather. Some even resort to feasting on the flesh of the dead when the choice is that or death. But the emaciated corpses in the street show that many didn't make that same choice. The survivors, for as long as they can keep that title, are sick and terrified. Rats chewing on the dead in the streets. Their hair is infested with lice, and the air, even in these freezing temperatures, is thick with smoke and buzzing flies. Dysentery, typhus, diphtheria, tuberculosis, and pneumonia run rampant, with no medical supplies left to treat them. A civilian population of 400,000 will be reduced to between 10 and 60,000 by the time the horrors are done. But many of the survivors won't be happy they made it out alive, given the struggle, starvation, and slavery that awaits them. The Nazis are eager to slaughter and deport them when they see them, and the Soviet regime refuses to help them escape. If they end up in the clutches of either army, they'll be forced into manual labor for the war effort. In the ruins of a nearby city block, a group of Soviet soldiers, grizzled and powered by little more than hate and righteous vengeance now, occupy the 4th floor. A group of Wehrmacht soldiers occupy the 3rd floor below them. The Germans turn their rifles up, the Russians down, and they fire at each other through the floor and ceiling, each screaming in rage. Bullets tear bodies apart, men collapse and bleed. When the empty magazines lead to futile clicks, the combatants draw their combat knives and rush to meet each other, carving into their flesh with mad abandon. It's the darkest depths of urban warfare. This is happening in over 20 buildings at once, while out on the streets, bodies are splattered under the treads of tanks, limbs are blown off by grenades, snipers and machine gunners fire on crowds with impunity. Soldiers of both sides stack the corpses that litter the streets like sandbags to provide some meager protection from the bullets. These bodies have ceased to be brothers in arms, comrades, or civilians now. It's all just rotten meat. Over an unimaginably brutal 6 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days, the tide of the Second World War will forever turn against Nazi Germany, but it will claim the lives of 1 to 3 million people in the process. It is considered by most military historians and scholars to be the largest and costliest battle in all of human history. It all began on July 17, 1942, in an objective personally demanded by Adolf Hitler himself. Stalingrad, the major Russian industrial city on the river Volga, must be captured by the German forces. Not only would claiming the city give Germany direct access to the oil fields of the Caucasus and give them a stage to wipe out the Red Army, it also had a secondary propaganda objective. If they could claim the city that bore Stalin's name, it would humiliate the Russian people and devastate Red Army morale. Stalin knew this and ordered his generals to defend the city no matter the cost. The full might of the German and Russian armies were converging in one city to battle to the bitter end. The two leaders behind them would punish retreat or surrender with death. It's a recipe for the most horrific bloodbath in history. Before the ground assault comes the Luftwaffe, blotting out the skies above Stalingrad and dropping over 1,000 tons of explosives on the city over the course of a single week. Buildings crumble, smoke rises, and screaming civilians, blackened with soot, many severely burned and missing limbs or cradling the charred corpses of loved ones, spill out onto the streets. They targeted military, economic, and industrial nerve centers in the city, flying low thanks to poor air defenses, hoping to soften it up for the conquest to come on land. In the following months came the tanks, and soon the ground troops, spilling into the city in the quick and ruthless style of the German blitzkrieg by early September. Claiming the banks along the Volga by October, the Axis forces penetrated deep into the city, causing chaos and horror in their wake. When the Soviets press back, battles rage on every front, squads trading gunfire in the streets or engaging in brutal hand-to-hand brawls in the city's ruined buildings. During the cold and dreadful nights, stealthy detachments of Soviet soldiers set their minds to butchery. They leave their outposts with knives, cleavers, hammers, and hatchets, hunting like packs of jackals for German troops wandering unfamiliar streets, tired, hungry, and afraid. When they find these stragglers, the most anyone hears is a dry, choked yelp before the soldiers set upon them and take them apart in the streets. No wasted bullets, no echoing reports that could draw in sympathetic Germans. Not clean, but quiet and ruthlessly efficient. They drag the bodies out of the streets, if they're still in one piece enough to drag. By February 1943, the fighting is over. The Axis forces have been repelled, and the Red Army have been galvanized to continue their relentless march into German territory. There, they'll even the score with relentless atrocities of their own against the German populace, but none could really truly hold a candle to the horrors of Stalingrad. The city is apocalyptic in the battle's wake, buildings completely leveled, with millions dead and millions more mutilated, traumatized, and grieving. The blood that's been spilled alone could drown thousands. Stalingrad proved that extreme warfare turns ordinary men into monsters. But one ancient civilization didn't wait for war. They engineered them from birth. To see the terrifying reality of what your life would actually look like as a Spartan soldier, click this video right here.